He says that Chicago police had a plan over this bloody 4th of July weekend. Nonetheless, as you indicated, Corey, there was a count of casualties that could have been from Afghanistan or Iraq.
We'll make it harder for law-abiding citizens, and criminals will still get their guns.
In many cases, the offenders, felons, some out on parole, some out on bond.
We have to respect the tradition in this country of people who want to defend themselves and their family from violence. There are people at high levels in this government who have bodyguards 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The average American does not have that.
Mayor Bloomberg, why can you defend yourself but not the majority of Americans? I mean, look at the team of security you got.
Every day, every school, at every level. One thing that I think is clear with young people and with adults as well is that we just have to be repetitive about this, and we need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way.
Was this the weapon of choice for a new kind of terrorist? When a 5-year-old girl said she and a classmate should shoot each other with bubbles, the school called it a terrorist threat.
AK-47s belong in the hands of soldiers, not in the hands of criminals.
You know, the right to bear arms is because that's the last form of defense against tyranny.
Lay down your arms, you damn rebels!
But we don't need the ability to arm ourselves against the Army or the police.
What kind of a situation in the U.S. would you see that happening?
I mean, we've got a lot of constitutionalists and a lot of people that stockpile weapons.
Discovered the clergy would help the government with potentially their biggest problem, us.
To say we're not turning our guns in, and we're not running, and we're not backing down. If you want them, come and take them.
I'm Margaret Hell for INFOWARS.com. Talk about scurrying around after Trump's speech. President Obama, is in Ontario today, and he's meeting with the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, and the Mexican President Nieto. And what are they talking about? They're talking about their bilateral relationship, their enhanced globalist union. Now, this is coming on the heels of a very historic speech, if you recall, that Donald Trump gave in Pennsylvania last night, talking about economic trade policy and how it's terrible for the American worker. Now, we're going to get to a very specific clip of that speech now. Take a listen.
Just as she's betrayed American workers for Wall Street and throughout her career, her whole career, she has betrayed the American worker. She's trying to put on a good front now. She will betray you again. Her career and her husband have signed so many disasters, and never, ever forget NAFTA. Just never, ever forget it, because you know what it's done, and I know what it's done. And in touring, I've seen the devastation that it's left behind.
Now, reports initially in the media saying that this meeting was in response to Brexit. But ironically, Trump gave this impressive historic trade speech last night talking about the joblessness of the American worker and what he's going to do when he becomes president, firstly gutting NAFTA. We heard him say that in the 7-point plan. Now, what this means is a candidate is setting the policy, setting the politics for a sitting president of the United States. Despite media reports saying that this is in response to Brexit, it doesn't take a genius to realize that Trump's trade policy has lit a fire under the president. He's going to solidify his NAFTA bros while he still can. Well, the president's trade meeting, it included a plea to all of the people of North America. This is what the leaders were asking. The leaders of the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, they say, be bold, look beyond the immediate problems of the present. Yeah, like the massive loss of jobs that people are experiencing in this country because of NAFTA. They want you to see far beyond that. Then they went on to stress how important global warming was and what they're going to do to tackle that. Now, media reports, they say that this was in response to Brexit, but Trump gave that historic speech less than 12 hours ago, and we saw our president scramble to make sure that his NAFTA bros, the globalists, stay in power, that the narrative stays the same, and oh yeah, it's all because of Brexit. It has nothing to do with Trump. Now, speaking of globalists that are very upset with Trump, igniting those angry nationalists, I want to take you to one in particular, James Traub, and he wrote this for Foreign Policy magazine. He originally writes for the New York Times. On occasion, he is an heir to the Bloomingdale chain, and this is what he had to say regarding Trump and the angry nationalists that he's incited. Traub urges the forces to keep out the nationalists. He's writing this from an elitist perspective. He says, did I say ignorant regarding those angry nationalists? Yes, I did. It's necessary to say people are deluded. And the task of leadership, i.e. the leaders, is to undelude them. Is that elitist? Maybe it is. Maybe we become so inclined to celebrate the authenticity of all personal conviction. And then he goes on and on and on, laying out the case for why it's good to be an elitist, A, that the leaders, the globalist movement, they've got to get control of this angry mob. Don't celebrate the individualism of people and their voice and their free expression. God forbid. We need to get a handle on this before it takes over and dissolves all of our globalist policies. That's what he's saying. He sounds very afraid to me, and it's echoing the same fear that the president expressed when he hopped on a plane this morning, scurried up to Canada to make sure that our trade deal with Canada and Mexico is still very much in place, towing that line. Well, as if we needed a lecture from James Traub over the lessons of history, over how Brexit was an utter repudiation of bankers and economists, an example of extremism gone mainstream. You know, some of us think that globalism is the extremism, and finally people are waking up. They understand what's happening. And Trump has made a very interesting case that NAFTA has not been good for the American worker. He highlighted the loss of manufacturing jobs. He laid out a very specific plan about what he's going to do with the trade policies that haven't benefited the American worker. Meanwhile, the president is trying to strengthen his ties, our ties at the moment, with globalist policies of NAFTA and our counterparts. We're going to have to wait and see how this plays out. But it looks like, if I'm not mistaken, Trump has actually set the stage, set the policy agenda for a sitting president. Now moving on to the Second Amendment and certain lawmakers that are taking a direct assault on your right to concealed carry. I'm speaking specifically of Senator Charlie Rangel out of New York. Senator Rangel, who has armed security himself, said that's perfectly fine. It's just not all right if you do. Now, we have a small clip of Rangel and his attitude about this, his rationale. Take a look.
Why should, say, the uber wealthy who have protection, had that protection, but individuals who are law-abiding citizens in your district should not? Let's talk about that.
Well, law-abiding citizens just shouldn't have to carry a gun. You know that, so you're not going to push me in that direction.
But you're protected by guns all over the place here in the Capitol.
Well, that's a little different. I think we need to be protected down here.
Now, we basically heard him give the argument for why it's okay for him to keep himself safe, just not you. He's very troubled with people in his district having guns. He says, we don't need that many guns. I don't know that briberies were involved in getting guns. He's talking about a specific case here, and I'll reference that in a second. And that is wrong, but overall, it's difficult to get a concealed weapon permit, and I'm glad to hear it. Now, we're speaking of the same Senator Rangel that was under an ethics committee investigation. He was found guilty of 11 violations surrounding personal finance and campaign finance. We're talking about a veteran senator here who, by all accounts, unethical. Let me translate that. If he were a citizen, a regular citizen, not a senator, committing the same acts of fraud, if you will, he'd be in jail. So he'd actually be a criminal. But because he's a senator, he was only dragged before the ethics committee, censored, nothing really happened to him. But it's okay if he is guarded with armed guards, just not you. You don't have a right to protect yourself. How do you like that? One corrupt senator saying that people don't have a basic right to the Second Amendment. Now, he echoes a sentiment that many lawmakers across the board, federally, state lawmakers, they feel. I want to get to that in a second, but talking about states for a second. States like Maryland, California, the District of Columbia, in fact, their firearms permitting approval requirements, they're very stringent. You have to give good cause to have a firearm in places like that, despite 37,000 issued licenses, including people like Mr. Rangel, for example, those who guard him, prominent business leaders, elected officials, judges and attorneys, they're fine. But the rest of us, we need to show a very good reason why we need that kind of protection. Now, Rangel isn't the only member on the Hill to be very anti-gun. Senator Feinstein has made some pretty remarkable statements regarding the Second Amendment herself. I brought a clip just for you. Take a look.
If I could have gotten 51 votes in the Senate of the United States for an outright ban, picking up every one of them, Mr. and Mrs. America, turn them all in, I would have done it. I could not do that. The votes weren't here.
So it's okay for lawmakers to be guarded, but little law-abiding peons like you and I, we have no right to the Second Amendment. Now, this troubling sentiment, it's echoed on the state level as well. We saw Hawaii pass a bill. It went through their House successfully. It went on their governor's desk to sign. This bill was sponsored by Senator Will Sparrow about gun control. And what he wants to do, every law-abiding citizen in the state of Hawaii that has a firearm, he wants to put them in an FBI criminal database, which Hawaii is doing pretty successfully. That means even if you've never committed a crime, never had an issue before, you just have a firearm, you're now on the FBI. You're on an FBI list. They're watching you in a criminal database. Now, Hawaii would be the first state where residents who own firearms would be in a federal criminal records database. Now, we've heard a lot this past week about no fly, no buy, and this arbitrary no-fly list that is executed at random, if you will. We're not really certain how somebody gets on it, but what we are sure about is if once you're on it, it is nearly impossible to get off of it. And that type of power, that type of secrecy, they're wanting to tie somebody who's on that do not fly list to a no buy list. So not only are they arbitrarily on a no fly list, but they also can't buy a gun for whatever reason. With all this information, it looks like the Second Amendment is under assault, but it's good to know at least our lawmakers, they practice what they preach, right? I'm Margaret Howell reporting for INFOWARS.com.
Recently, we went back down to the U.S.-Mexico border to visit McAllen, Texas. Now, if you guys recall, it was 2 years ago that we went down there and we spoke to the emergency manager who gave us some very surprising news. Now, I'm just curious as to what point these people come in contact with the Border Patrol. Do you know?
Originally?
Yes.
You'd have to ask them. So the only ones that you'll see here are family units that are like a mom and a couple of kids that they have determined don't pose any sort of security risk and don't have a criminal background, and they've got relatives or help somewhere in the interior. So that category of people, again, it was our understanding they provide them a ticket, and then they drop
the
them
Border
off at
Patrol
our doorstep.
provides them a ticket?
That's what we were told, and that's what I understood, but obviously some of them didn't. Or they're arranging tickets with them there, you know what I mean, with a relative that's paying for something. I don't know.
And that was 2 years ago. Now, since then, more news outlets have gotten around to reporting it, and I say better late than never. But this time around, we spoke to a Border Patrol vice president who also gave us some very intriguing intel. He was telling us about the numbers of people that were coming over the border, how frequently they pick them up, pretty much on a routine basis. He said you can go out there 2 or 3 times a day and they just do a sweep and they pick up large groups of people. And here's what he had to say. On a general, let's say a month, what type of drugs do you encounter and what quantities?
The most common is marijuana. We see thousands upon thousands of pounds weekly. We do see a lot of cocaine. We're starting to see heroin and meth a lot more. Usually those were reserved for the ports of entry, but now they started running those across the river as well.
Okay. And as far as the people coming over, are your agents encountering any type of infectious diseases, people with illnesses as they cross the border?
Oh, most definitely. We see tuberculosis pretty regularly, scabies more often than not. We have large amounts of infectious diseases as far as scabies go, and the interesting part with that is it's not actually seen on the body during the infectious period, and so these people clear through our system and then they go into the rest of the country with that disease. We see a lot of measles, a lot of chickenpox, a lot of unidentified illnesses that you know, a lot of lung infections that we have no idea what they are, and again, that's just what we catch.
Right. Okay, now we've seen reports of the quarantine facilities at your Border Patrol stations, some reports saying that they're just a piece of yellow tape. Since then, has the situation improved at all?
No, not at all. You know, we do still have the yellow tape. Sometimes they use a red tape. I don't know if there's any significance there. We do have nurses and doctors that are on staff that are there, but as far as a quarantine facility or an actual method of treating these people and really quarantining them so it doesn't spread, we don't have that.
So with this knowledge in hand, we decided to go down to the border ourselves, and we were probably out there maybe an hour or so before a raft started to float across from the Mexico side and come here to the U.S. side. And we were driving around, and we encountered multiple Border Patrol agents, also people there from the Wildlife Preserve who were very interested in our activities, saying, "What are you guys doing out here?" We said, "Well, we're just reporters from Austin, Texas, and we want to report on what's happening out here." And it was a very interesting situation because even though they had no clear signs posted, they kept telling us that we're on private land. I'm like, well, where does it begin?